my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and today is one of those days. I had planned on talking about something completely different, literally probably up until about 10 minutes ago. And then I was just talking to myself as I typically do, and just sort of talking myself through like a funk, like a morning funk, you know what I mean? Where you like, I woke up this morning and I was like super energized. I had been really exhausted the last couple of days. And quite frankly, I've been exhausted the last month or so. I've had really bad, I guess, insomnia. I've had trouble falling asleep, and it's just been my mind has been going in a good way. Like I've been super creative over the last month or so, and it's been amazing. But as a result, I've had trouble sleeping, you know. When I lay on the pillow, my mind is just racing and thinking about other ideas, and it's just like this excitement, you know. And as a result, I've had trouble sleeping, and I've been really, you know, trying my best to like catch up on sleep when I can. And then obviously my schedule, if you listen to the show, you know, I DJ and stuff like that, and then I run a couple of businesses, specifically the U-Haul one, so it's kind of polar opposite to the DJ life, right? U-Haul business, I open early. The DJ life, I get home late. So a lot of overlap and exhaustion as a result there. But I woke up like for the first time in a few days feeling really energized today, and I did some writing and did a couple things around the house, and then I was just like drained of my energy. Like it just felt to go away. It was like, you know, a tease. It's kind of like when you're getting over being sick and you wake up and you're like, oh, I feel amazing, and then like, you know, an hour into the day you're like, oh shit, nope, I am still sick. I'm feeling like that, right? So that's a sort of long-winded backstory into today's conversation, but I was just like, you know, kind of giving myself a pep talk because I was feeling a little bit down, and I was like getting annoyed with myself, like, man, why aren't you moving a little bit quicker to get your day started and get into all the shit you have to do today? And, you know, I was sort of then getting down, like, man, I don't feel like doing anything today. Like, what's wrong with me? Blah, 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 right? And just having one of those days that I think all of us go through, and I try to be candid about and honest about, and not sell you on some bullshit of like, just because you're doing your passion, you never work a day in your life. And I sort of was reminded of this conversation I'd heard on a podcast with Seth Godin. He was being interviewed, and I can't remember the name of the podcast. I'll put it in the show link. I think I have it on my podcast app. And it was like anyway, it's a decent conversation, right? But it was mostly like this woman who's a creator. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. But she was interviewing Seth, and it kind of became this conversation where she was sort of picking his brain on kind of what she should do next, and I guess what she was struggling with as a professional creator. And that was sort of fascinating, I guess, and sort of one of the, you know, advantages of being able to have a platform and have an audience is that you can have conversations with people that most of us would sort of just have to watch from afar or have to pay to sit down with, right? And anybody not familiar, Seth Godin is like a marketing expert. He invented email marketing, and he is the author of the book The Tipping Point, which is kind of like one of those cornerstone marketing and I think like branding, or more like marketing and advertising books that like everybody should read if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to like sell something. He talks about like how things sort of become mainstream or how they find an audience, and that's sort of the tipping point from like how something goes from obscurity to then being culturally relevant to profitable, right? And I always kind of revisit that book randomly. I'll just like open different pages and hear different case studies that he talks about in it to kind of, you know, give me ideas when I'm in need of some inspiration. But in this particular conversation, what I found to be fascinating, and it sort of verbalized something that I struggle with, right? And I'm like, if you haven't noticed, I'm in a very introspective place of my life. If I could put a word on this year, and it's a long ass intro, I know, I'll get to the meat of this conversation, but if I could put a word for this year, like, with hindsight being 2020, it's a very introspective year. I feel like I am really doubling down on the idea of awareness, right? And, I've already talked about that a bunch, and that's one of the cornerstones, the 4 pillars of conscious living, the philosophy behind Just Be, my wellness brand. But I feel like I've doubled down on it even further than I ever have before, and like really just trying to figure out what makes me tick, what are the things that I'm exceptional at, where are the areas that I struggle, where are the areas that I need to be aware of that are holding me back from like really crossing the finish line in a way that I can be proud of. And my sort of issue that I struggle with is getting across the finish line. Right? I'll come up with 1,000,001 ideas. I'll be incredibly inspired. I will hit the ground running harder than anybody you've ever seen. But once I begin to sort of get to the end of a project and get to the place of like, all right, it's time to sort of button it up, refine it so that we can then get ready to sort of put it out there into the world, I then begin to struggle. I then begin to lose interest in the project. I then begin to get distracted by the next shiny object. And I lose a lot of the discipline that I had when I was very much enthused by the idea. And I've noticed this even happens in projects that are already off the ground and running. I eventually get to a point where I get bored with the idea, the concept, whatever it might be. And this creator was basically asking Seth, she was saying, she's had a lot of success. She puts out a lot of videos on like financial literacy, right? And what she was telling Seth was like she has this formula for basically going viral where she can create a video and she knows exactly how to format it in a way that's going to get a lot of views and a lot of attention, right? That's sort of, it's second nature to her at this point. She's mastered that. But she wants to branch off into other things, right? And she was sort of expressing how while she feels like she's still giving value to people, it's not as much fun for her to create those videos, and she's not as fired up about it anymore. And I relate to that a lot with some of the content that I make. For those of you following me on social media, some of the basically the piece of content that I always get the most feedback on when I'm out and about is like the green screen current events that I do. And I get fired up about doing them often. I should say initially, I found them to be so fun to sort of try to put together this 1.5-minute commentary and a cohesive thought and be sort of cheeky and making fun of a situation while also giving information and also providing value to people. And I loved sort of seeing like, oh, wow, this is getting great feedback. But eventually, even though it is, again, the thing that I'm getting the most feedback from as far as like a content creator standpoint goes on social media, I find myself struggling to consistently do them because I'm just uninspired. It feels like work now at this point, right? And so I related to her sort of talking about her content in that way, that even though it's built her this massive following and she's doing it professionally now, she still finds herself struggling and sort of wanting to deviate and do other things. And his answer to that was, you need to keep doing the thing that is getting you the most results. That's the work, right? And basically what he explained and what I want to kind of dive into today is what separates people who are hobbyists and people who do things for a living. And what I mean by that is I know there's a lot of people on here or listening to this that maybe have aspirations of doing something other than what they're doing now. Maybe you already do it. Maybe you have some side hustles. Maybe you have a podcast. You have a clothing, whatever it might be. You want to open a business, whatever it might be. And I think the thing that I struggle with in sort of this reflection as I've been in my cave for the last year, basically, I recognize that I have a problem when something becomes my profession as opposed to my hobby. When it's my hobby, I'm having the best time in the world and I'm fired up about it. But once I sort of am blessed enough to move it into a place of being my profession, I then start losing discipline. I lose a bit of that steam, a bit of that fire. And if I'm having an honest conversation with myself, it is the reason why I'm not doing certain things that I want to do, right? This, like, you know, this is one of the things that I have to sort of grasp and master if I want to ascend to the next level of my career, essentially, right? And I see it so much in other people, and I think we don't have the vocabulary. I mean, or just sort of like, it's this awareness around like what's actually happening that keeps us from crossing that threshold, because, you know, we're always fed these quotes of like, you know, you do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And I've for a long time called that bullshit, because it does become work, right? And I feel like that's not spoken about quite enough, you know, and even for me, I struggle with the fact that like my hobbies have become my job, and now what the fuck do I do for fun, essentially, right? And there's a lot wrapped around that. But I think for a lot of people listening, if you think to yourself, why haven't I been as consistent? Why haven't I finished that idea? Why haven't I done the thing that I've wanted to do, tried it, or really gone about it in a bigger way? I just think that there's like that one bridge that's missing where we have to recognize it's going to feel like work, and that's okay. And we have to accept it and treat it as work and embrace that part of it. And I think a lot of times, and I'm big on pivoting and things like that, but I think, and if I'm rambling, I apologize. I'm like, again, working through this idea for myself personally as I talk to you about it. But I think what oftentimes happens, and again, this is where self-awareness, because there's no black and white textbook answer I can give you on to know if you're truly not into something or if it's just now becoming the work and you sort of have to deal with that, right? But there is a point where the sort of fun, exciting, energetic part of it sort of stops. And not to say that's completely drained out of it, but it sort of stops just being the fun, energetic thing. And now you have to switch into sort of suit and tie, operational manager, how do we get this project done mode. And I'm going to pause there because I want to kind of get into the meat of this conversation and not just make this one long intro. So I'm going to finish that thought in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so piggybacking off of what I was just saying, and I actually want to add like an indirect quote from Rick Rubin, the music producer, who in his book talks about this idea, right? And he's talking about, obviously, the idea of like crafting, songwriting, and things like that, and writing and producing. But I think it applies to all that we're talking about, where he talks about how there's a point in time where when you first start something, it's beneficial to not put any expectations on it, to not have any timetable on it, to not have any sort of restriction almost. It's the idea of just sort of receiving the download, the inspiration, and just allowing yourself to get lost in it like a child, right? And just see where it goes. But you can't operate in that mentality the entire time, because if you do, you're sort of just going to keep staying in this mode of play, which again is not a bad thing, but you have to understand that that means you then are just a hobbyist. And I don't say that in a derogatory way. I think there's beauty in being a hobbyist. But if you actually have aspirations of something more, of this potentially being your 9 to 5, then you can't operate as just a hobbyist. You have to find the balance. And that's what makes something like entrepreneurship so difficult, and what makes making a living off of what you love so difficult. Because a lot of people find it easy to tap into the hobbyist part of themselves, right? The part of you that just gets fired up and gets lost in it, and it's like the greatest thing ever, and you realize why life is worth living. But then they find it difficult to transition into, again, for visual purposes, throwing on the suit and tie, getting into the brass tacks of it all, opening up like an Excel spreadsheet, and getting into that part of the project, right? And that's sort of the secret sauce of entrepreneurship, I think, and why it is so elusive and difficult. You have to be able to wear both hats. And obviously, if you're in partnership with somebody and you're the creative brain and they're like the fucking business person, that's probably the ideal situation, right? Where they can sort of tell you, all right, now's the time for me to do this, do that. But again, it sort of reemphasizes that you have to have both in any creative endeavor, any creative project. In order to actually finish something, you have to have both sides of that coin, whether you're the person implementing both sides or you have a partner who's sort of keeping you in line, right? And back to that Rick Rubin thing where he talks about there's a time and place to sort of just be lost in the creative download. And then there's a time and place where you say, we've done enough experimenting, we've done enough play. We now have to get it across the finish line. And that's where you begin to implement deadlines and things of that nature, right? But his distinction is like you don't put a deadline on something creative from the beginning. You sort of allow it to develop naturally. Then once it's sort of, you have this skeleton idea of what you want and what it's going to be, you then place parameters so that you can actually get it across the finish line, right? And why this is resonating, I think, with me so heavily, and I'm careful with the verbiage that I'm using here, right? Because instinctively, when I was talking about this and speaking it out loud, I wanted to say, the reason I'm not where I want to be is because of X, Y, and Z. But a part of me feels like I'm diminishing all that I have done and accomplished by using that phrasing, right? But truthfully, there are a lot of things that I would have loved to have done, and I'm not saying that with any sort of regret. It's a place of reflection of like, okay, these were things that I was passionate about, that I loved doing. What was the sort of friction point that kept me from actually pushing it further, right? And even beyond me, I look at some of my friends, and people that I came up with, some of the most creative people I've ever met, some of the most gifted, a lot of them naturally more talented and gifted at like playing an instrument than I am, or even just art-wise and things of that nature. And they sort of never were able to figure it out. And I analyze that. And again, I'm in my cave. I'm in my sort of self-reflection part of my life right now, really diving into that and trying to fine-tune everything. And I think a lot of my struggle for consistency and discipline comes with my difficulty in crossing over from being a hobbyist to being a professional. And I don't have a problem doing it with something like the podcast, right? I'll use this as an example. Again, like today, I got like a creative bug early in the morning. I think what began to drain a bit of my energy was like, okay, I have this like creative itch where I went down the rabbit hole of like studying some content creators, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I'm taking notes, and that's fun to me. I love like doing case studies and things like that, and analyzing stuff. But then it was like, oh, all right, dude, it's like, you've been doing this for like an hour and a half. It's kind of getting into the day. You have things you actually have to do. You have to record a podcast today. You have to, respond to a couple of emails and things like that. Like, we can't spend all of our day just deep diving into this, as energizing as it is. And I think that began to drain some of my energy, right? But here I am recording the podcast, which I love doing. But there's the second layer of accountability, right? I have a brand behind me, a partnership behind me, where they've paid me to do X amount of episodes specifically on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? And I have advertisers and sponsors who have paid to be a part of X amount of episodes. If I don't put out an episode, they're not getting their money's worth, right? I'm not fulfilling my contract. I'm in violation of my contract, right? And that is a checks and balances system. I have people who have, made thankfully, this podcast is a part of their routine, a part of their life. They've joined me in community for this, and I made a promise to put out these 2 episodes every week, right? So there's, again, accountability. That is holding me accountable to say that even on the days where it doesn't feel like a hobby, it feels like a job, I have an accountability layer that makes me sit down and do this even when on the days it feels like a job. And again, truthfully, like sitting here now, I'm having a great time. I love it. It's like the preparation, and then like the idea of like, oh my God, I have to press record on a camera. You know, it's like you're mentally the little, like you just build it up in your head. But once I get lost in the sauce of speaking, I'm here, and I'm loving it. But what I'm saying is, there's an accountability layer that is making me not fall short on the promise I made here creatively. Now, on an entrepreneurial venture or a creative venture where it's solely just me and I don't have anybody to answer to, or a project that I'm creating out of thin air where nobody really knows about it and there's not an expectation of it coming, then I find myself making excuses for why I didn't do the task I wanted to do that day. I find myself sort of questioning if it's something I even want to do because now it's not fun anymore because I'm putting expectations on it, right? And that's where personally I have struggled. I have struggled in bringing things across the finish line, and I end up self-sabotaging myself and not sort of doing the grunt work that is needed to finish this idea, this concept. And we're gonna take a quick break here. I'm gonna pause on that because I know I've been talking for a minute. But I want to say, if you've gotten this far and you don't relate to this 100%, use this as a sort of blueprint to self-analyze yourself. And if there are things that you feel like you're not doing or you're not where you want to be, the same way I'm sort of out loud having this introspective moment, I want you to analyze where you've fallen short, right? And forget about any external factors. Where have you fallen short personally? And where is the pattern? Because I think there is a pattern for all of us who maybe have had some false starts or we're not where we want to be. There's some sort of pattern to be picked up upon as to why we aren't where we want to be. So think about that for a second, and I'll be right back. All right, we are back, and I want to like just also preface what we're talking about, because I think it can very easily go down the sort of the toxic road of being a workaholic as well and like burning yourself out. And I want to make sure I'm not condoning or co-signing that. I think there's a really, really fine line there. But again, that's where the introspection and the self-awareness sort of comes into play of knowing, am I really burnt out? Have I been burning the candle at both ends here? Or am I just sort of coming down from the sugar high that was the initial idea, and I need to find the extra gear that allows me to finish this now that it's beginning to feel like a task or a job? And again, I can't answer that for you. You sort of have to have that self-reflection. But I think in talking about, you know, sort of my own shortcomings with all this stuff, you know, like this is one of the major sort of missing links to why I haven't ascended to where I want to be. Or why I haven't ascended to what I feel I'm capable of. I think I'd rather word it that way, because I don't want to diminish all that I've accomplished. But I also know I'm capable of just so fucking much, right? And just like inside baseball, you know, because we're all friends here, what sort of began to, I guess, send me down this analyzation of myself was, you know, I'm currently working on is it 3 or 4? 4. Geez, 4 really big projects that are important to me. And I'm laughing because it just sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. The fact that I have like these 4 big projects that I'm like, oh, these are my priorities, and once I finish them, I'll be able to like relax. But it's you know, I have these major things, and I'm like, these are sort of the things that I think in the short term are going to provide me with financially where I want to be at this point, and in the long run are going to build up more of what I want to do, right? And all of them, I was like firing on all cylinders over the last month, and like being able to compartmentalize my days where I was hitting each and every one of them, like something for them each day. And I was in that beginning phase, right, that I talked about, Rick Rubin mentions. I'm receiving the inspirational download, and I'm not like giving myself a deadline. I'm just saying, like, listen, when the creative thing just fucking hits you, go work on it, play with it. And then you move on to the next thing that you're fired up about. And it's a win as long as we just worked on it each day for a little bit. It's a fucking win, right? And that was true. But now we've moved on to the next phase of it as, okay, now we're not really in R&D. We're not in research and development anymore. We're not in creative brainstorming. You know, we're not in sort of the fun of like figuring out what this thing is going to be. We know what it's going to be. We've done the research. We have a plan in place. Now it's like, all right, let's fucking start tying up the loose ends. Let's start like actually getting this ready to be put out there into the world or in front of the people that it needs to be in front of. And that's when I hit a wall. That is when all of the discipline and energy and excitement for these projects that I had began to fizzle. It began to diminish. I began to get sidetracked by other things, right? And other ideas are coming to me and other things I want to, spend my time doing. And I am sitting down, one of the projects is I'm writing a new book. And this one, the goal is to work with a publisher on it. And I'm getting like the pitch ready for it and having like some of the sample writing from it and the outline and all these different things, right? And now that we're like past the point of like exploring the creative ideas and now I just actually have to like write summaries and plans and things like this. The same time that I would designate, I would write at like 7 a.m. from like 7 a.m. to about 9. I'm sitting there with my laptop in front of me. I'm getting sidetracked. I'm going on my phone. I am, checking emails at that time when I never normally would, right? I'm doing anything to avoid the work because it's now crossed into the point of no longer being the fun thing. It's now become the job that it needs to be, right? Now it's crossed over from me being a hobbyist to me being a professional. And I need to now show up as a professional and hold myself accountable on a project that, there's no real accountability aside from my own self, right? If I stopped doing it now, nobody would even know until basically I just told you guys this right now. And that's where I went down this path of like, fuck, I am struggling. I am so close to the finish line on this project, and I'm self-sabotaging myself because I am letting myself get distracted by doing anything and everything other than just this fucking finite task that needs to get done. And I set a deadline for myself like this week. Like we're done with the fucking book pitch. Like this week it is done, and we move on to finishing up the next project because you have all these half-done projects, these half-done great ideas, and you just keep on getting distracted by the new next shiny thing. And that's my glaring issue holding me back in my professional life. And I tried to like psychoanalyze and like be like, oh, where is this coming from? What's the deeper thing? Why am I self-sabotaging in this way? And yeah, I think there's a lot of things that probably come up in that, right? Where it's like, now it's like a real thing. The pressure's on. I set this goal. Now we're actually going to find out if I achieve it or not. Now I'm inviting other people to be a part of it, and they're going to judge it. And what if I fail? What if I thought this was my next big thing and I fall flat on my face, right? Whereas at least now in this sort of limbo phase, it's like, oh, I'm working on it, right? Rather than like having to actually finish it and just find out if it's what the fuck I hoped it would be. And yeah, I'm using you guys as my journal for this. But I hope this fucking resonates. But it's again, like, I guess I want this to be a lesson, right? As somebody who has figured out how to make a lot of their hobbies into actual things that bring in money and is his actual job now, this is the biggest struggle. And I think it's something that we all should be aware of, is that we have to throw on a different hat. And it doesn't feel good. Parts of it feel good, right? The checks feel great. The validation that somebody wants to professionally work with you feels great. But there are going to be aspects of it that feel like a fucking job. That it's unavoidable. Right? Just like when you wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off and you have to get ready for work, and there are a lot of days where you're just like, I want to fucking turn this alarm off and go back to bed. But you don't, because you have to go to work. You have to, you know what I mean? Like, it's your job. There are going to be a lot of days like that, even when you're your own boss, even when you're an entrepreneur, even when you are doing things that you love doing. And it's a bitter, tough pill to swallow, but it's a part of, I think, achieving the greatness, right? And I think that is why you look at somebody like a Tom Brady or a Kobe Bryant. What was the X factor for them? And I actually love the two of them as an example, because one, Tom Brady was somebody who wasn't supposed to be a successful NFL quarterback, let alone the GOAT, right? He was drafted, I think, in the 6th round, if I'm not mistaken. And Kobe talks about being a teenager and competing in tournaments and sort of realizing, wow, I am not at the same level as everybody. And that for years, he sort of just went, his goal was like, every summer, I'm just going to get better at one more of the fundamentals. One summer it was free throws. One summer it might have been dribbling, whatever. And he recognized that through that sort of monotonous routine, it made him a better all-around basketball player until he eventually became the best in his class, right? But I think that is the differentiating factor. How do we show up for ourselves and the things that we love on the days that we don't actually love them or feel like doing them, right? Because when you're a hobbyist, it's like, oh, I'm going to work on this on the weekend. It's fun. I'm bored. Oh, let me just do my hobby. But when it's your job, it's like, no, you have to do this shit. But I think a real world example of it is like being a parent, right? And I say this as a dog dad. But like, yeah, you're excited about it, right? I'm so excited to get my pup, and I don't regret it at all. But there are days where I'm like, bro, I am exhausted. I want to just lay on the fucking couch all day, and this guy is annoying the shit out of me because he wants to go and run around outside, right? And I'm just like, bro, I don't have it in me. But guess what? I have no choice. I made a commitment when I bought the dog that I have to take care of him and give him what he needs. And he needs exercise, he needs play, right? That's a part of it. Just like with your kids, I'm sure on days you love them, but there are days where it feels like a lot of fucking work and you're like, man, what did I get myself into? But you still show up, right? Because it's a part of the package that comes with being a parent. And I think that is, I wasn't prepared for that coming into being a creative, an entrepreneur, whatever it might be. And I've seen it amongst a lot of my creative friends where they keep jumping to the next thing, myself included at times, the second that they're like have a minor inconvenience with the thing they were once passionate about. Right? When it becomes exhausting, when you have to fit it into your schedule at weird times or whatever it might be. Or, you know, I have friends who are doing creative stuff professionally. And, you know, for the sake of example, I have a friend who does like video and graphic design stuff for a living now. You know, he's doing it with a creative agency. And, you know, that was like the dream, right? He got to quit his other job, you know, that he was doing the 9 to 5, and now just does the video stuff and design work full time. But there's been times where he's sort of complained that it's like, oh, but it's like, you know, we're putting out a bunch of videos and it's not like, you know, stuff I'm super passionate about, like super creative, you know, like I want to make more like documentary style stuff and really creative. And it's like, I'm just putting out a bunch of clips for Instagram and things like that. And yeah, the goal, if that is what you love doing, should be to be making documentary films then. But this is all part of that process and part of your professional life as a creative. Because even if you're making documentary films, right, that's what you want to do, guess what? There are going to be moments within that where there are monotonous tasks that you don't feel like doing, but you have to do, right? Maybe you have to sit there and put together a list of equipment that you're going to rent. And that's probably super fun the first few times. Eventually it's like, do I really want to fucking sit here and go through a list of all these lenses and this and that? And what do I, right? No, I want to be out in the street filming. I want to be doing cool editing effects, all these things. No, but then you have to set up interviews, or you have to manage people, whatever it might be. Like, there's always going to be those monotonous tasks that are associated with you doing what you love doing, right? The things that you have to do in order to actually make it a tangible thing rather than just an idea. And that's what I want, I guess, to bring clarity on. And I'm speaking to myself about that. Because I think a younger version of me would just keep letting himself off the hook, or would prolong things to the point that it's not even relevant anymore. And that's my excuse why I stopped working on that project. And it's I think it's I don't know, it's like I don't want to rob anybody of like the fucking fantasy of doing what you love for a living, but you're sort of gonna have to keep reinventing that fire while simultaneously doing the shit that's now become monotonous. Right? And I'll kind of end there on the other part that Seth Godin talks about. Like he says, double down on the things that are working, right? Who cares? You're not as fired up about them anymore. If they're working, you have to keep doing them. That's what makes you a professional and not a hobbyist. Now, simultaneously, find other things within that now are the new idea that fires you up and makes you feel just as excited, right? So, for the sake of example, for me, I talked about like those green screen current event videos that I do on my Instagram that are like my most viewed and engaged posts. For me, I'm like, if I'm not inspired by a story, I'm not going to talk about it, right? And like, so I'll go weeks without something. But the reality is I'm doing myself a disservice when people are interested in that content a lot. So in order for me to fix that, and to keep operating at a high level as a professional creator, I need to show up and do those stories just as I would if I was on the radio every day and we had to talk about something new every day. I would find a way to keep talking about those things, right? I wouldn't be able to let myself off the hook because I have an audience waiting for me. I have to look at it in that way. And then simultaneously, the content that is new and exciting to me, go fuck around and do that as well. But I think what oftentimes happens, what I'm guilty of, is completely abandoning what's working because it's now lost its shininess to me personally. And then I just jump to the next exciting thing. And I keep that fucking pattern going over and over again. And it's why I haven't been able to, I think, build something that I personally feel like I can stand behind completely. And I don't, like, I'm fearful that this episode is, like, unrelatable to anybody. And I hope that I'm wrong here. But I think, again, like, what I'm fucking optimizing right now. This is what I'm doing, right? I am optimizing the shit out of how do I, like, get even better than I have been? How do I recreate success? How do I create sustainable success? I'm self-analyzing and having introspective moments like fucking crazy right now. And I think that, if you want to take away one thing from this, it's that. It's analyze the shit about how your mind works. Good, bad, whatever. So that you can help yourself get into a better groove that keeps allowing you to recreate and have more and more continuous success. And I'm going to pause it there because I'll kind of summarize. I feel like that's a great sort of summary that we'll do in conclusions, Stu.
Time for conclusions, Stu.
All right, so I think summarizing that fucking brain dump that I just laid on you, I think we just have to have very real conversations with ourselves, right? And I think life is so, like, I think success as far as professional goes, right? Like, I want to just talk about that. I think today we're talking more about, like, career success, right? What I've begun to sort of realize is it's very formulaic. The people who have found continued success are following a sort of often unspoken, unseen formula. Whether it be in the way that they approach it, right? They're following a formula that speaks to their strengths and compensates for their weaknesses, right? So, like, for me, right now, I have to just be hyper aware of where my weaknesses lie and do my best to sort of counteract them and try to put systems in place that allow me to not fall victim to them as often, at least, right? And the long-term solution in that would be having a sort of partner, a business partner who my sort of weakness or, you know, my lack of strength in the area of deadlines and sort of project management, that's their strength, right? Where I can then focus on doing a lot of the creative, and then when it's time, they can step in and give me the structure that I need to successfully complete a project or idea, or successfully do it on a consistent basis, like this podcast, right? The system that I have in place with my partnership with my Cultura gives me the structure I need to consistently do this. And that awareness, I think, is going to allow me to begin to create a formula based off of what has worked and then now apply it to other parts of my life, right? So I'm like another stream of consciousness within this, right? Why has this podcast worked, the partnership worked? It's because of what I just displayed to you. I'm allowed to be freely creative and do what I have to do, but my Cultura created structures and guidelines in order for me to do it consistently. So now that's the formula. Every other project I work on, I need to recreate that formula as best as I can to give myself the best opportunity for success, right? And obviously, there are going to be things beyond my control, beyond your control. But at least you can check all the boxes and say, okay, I did everything I could to produce the best product or the best version of myself for this project. And yeah, maybe it might fail because of whatever, the market, or it might fail because people didn't latch on to the idea, or my part, whatever it might be. But at least I know I followed a formula that gave me the best fighting opportunity. And I think that is what successful people do over and over again. They have a formula that gives them the best odds. And I think I touched on this a bit with Dr. Paul Rivera, that episode. But again, it's like just really fucking hyper self-awareness stuff. And also, I think on the topic of hobbyist versus professional, it's okay to be a hobbyist. There's a blessing in that too. Maybe you don't want to do the entrepreneur thing. I've kind of come around on that, and I don't think it's for everybody. And I don't think that if it's for you, you're better than people who it's not for. We're all different. I think there's value in a 9-to-5, right? If that's the way your brain thinks, and you could find a company that has a corporate culture that is like makes you feel good, and it's work that you don't hate doing. And then on the weekends you want to, I don't know, knit sweaters because that's like something you're passionate about. That's a fucking win as well. So again, it's like it's knowing yourself and knowing what you actually want to do and what I guess you're actually capable of, right? Or what speaks to you. You know, and I think that is sort of the bigger game here, but again, it's but if you say to yourself, no, I want to make a living doing something I love doing, or a creative project, or whatever it might be, you have to understand that you're gonna be at a point where it feels just like your 9-to-5. It's gonna feel better because it's like I love this thing and it inspires me, but there are gonna be times where it brings up a lot of those same feelings you had for the 9-to-5. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this today. I want to call out. You know what I mean? And the problem is you actually now have the ability to do it because you're an entrepreneur. You can call out. You can not show up if you wanted to, right? Obviously, the consequences are not going to be in your favor, but that is what it takes. You have to be able to put on that professional hat. There's no escaping it, I guess, is my realization. There's no escaping the work itself. And there's no escaping the days, the times you just don't feel like you have it in you. But you have to figure out a way to do it. And you have to be okay with that if this is your journey. I hope this resonated with somebody. This was like, I needed this, by the way. So thank you if you just are entertaining me. But just, again, this is just awareness. This is shit you should be writing in your journal as well, like about your way your mind is thinking and observations. I'm constantly observing and trying to tweak and optimize, and I will be to the day I die, right? That's the beauty of us as human beings, is like our endless potential for growth, and it takes having these sort of conversations with yourself, and I think placing responsibility on yourself rather than blaming any sort of external factor. Where have I fallen short? And when you do that, then it's like, oh, now I can optimize, right? Because I could easily be like, people just don't get me. They're not giving me the opportunities that I want. It's like, no, I'm not going to allow myself to blame external things. The reality is, what am I not doing to reach the right people? What am I not doing consistently Or what am I not doing to connect with people consistently? What can I do to do more of that, to build a deeper connection, a deeper level of community? Right? That's a very different thought process than people just don't understand me and they're not ready for it. It is what it is. Because now I actually can work on this and get better and hone my craft and put myself in a better position for success rather than just sort of throwing my arms up and, whatever, leaving it up to fate or chance. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation. Anyway, I'm going to stop now because I literally could do this for 2 hours. I have obviously a lot on my mind as far as like me just having so much time to myself, which has been a blessing, where I'm really just trying to get better in so many different ways. With that said, thank you all so much for listening. DM me at DJ Dramos if this resonated in some sort of fucking way. I would genuinely, I need a little bit of that external validation, and let me know if this hit for anybody, because I wanna optimize providing value as well with the podcast. And yeah, that's it. And anybody join the Just Be Social Club, I appreciate you. You could DM me for that. Again, I'll give you the link, or DM me. I don't know what I said. You could DM me for that. I've been slacking on that. I promise once I finish up these projects that I'm like knocking out right now, we're getting across the finish line, I'm going to be putting a lot more attention into that. But we're building. Slowly but surely we are building. With that said, thank you all so much again for tuning in. I'll catch you on Thursday with a brand new episode for our Thursday Trends episode. Until then, stay safe and we'll talk soon. Peace.